that the Minister mentioned this morning. So in the Senate as well as in the House of Representatives, member after member, there goes my phone, member after member has been getting up to speak in support of that motion and to condemn what the Senator said last night. And obviously we can have a look at that later. I'm sure there are lots of clips that are circulating, and there will certainly be some, you know, pretty fucking entertaining Hansard to read later on. I did just have a good chat with Penny Pappas, who is the advisor for Maria Van Vacuno. Maria has, many of you may know her personally, she has committed a lifetime to what used to be called ethnic affairs, but to advancing the cause of multicultural Australia. I also had a quick chat with Tony Burke. We've been texting for the last little while. He was hoping to come and join us at 1:30, but then had to scramble back to the House. And as I mentioned earlier, the speech that he gave last night, which was the first in response to what Senator Anning said, is really worth, it's really worth seeing. And that brings us very much to our theme, in, you know, the kind of, in a grim way, about how to redress inequity, because it's really important that we have some conversations that are open and comfortable and uncomfortable, and that allow us to make comments and ask questions and really think about, bless you, really think about what are the commitments that we hope and expect institutions to make spaces open, accessible, diverse, in all the ways that are important to us all? What are the commitments that we can each make as individuals? You know, the best way to ask the question of how to address inequity is, of course, to check our own privilege, understand where we're from, understand when we're in particular kinds of engagement, whether they're individual or institutional, about the values, the approach that we're kind of expecting the person that we're speaking to or engaging with to, you know, to condone or buy into. What are the underlying values? What is it that sustains inequity? How can we encourage people to afford others both the specificity and the complexity that they afford themselves? And I was really struck at one of the roundtable discussions that we've had across the country in the last little while. This was the Melbourne one recently, and we sort of asked the question of, like, what are the key issues in this state? And we covered all the sort of predictable pre-election type things, and then Shannon Goodwin reframed the conversation around the notion of inequity, inequality, rising inequality, and how important it is that this is something that we each take personal, professional, institutional, whatever powers we wield, responsibility for. So to begin to open up our conversation, and we've got an hour, and obviously not nearly enough time, but like all of the sessions in Future Forward is just encouraging us to begin and open up a discussion, tell each other what we need to hear, tell Nava what we need to hear so we can keep acting, advocating, developing approaches, and we'll take a break after this and come back and look at advocating. Abdul Abdullah is an artist who has worked in a few different places. He's from Perth. Some of us know he didn't have the best time when he was in Melbourne. He's now based in Sydney. And we're going to start by just listening to Abdul's perspective, and then we will open up, we'll have a bit of a chat, and then we'll devote most of the time to discussion and questions from all of us. Abdul.
Hello.
Yeah.
First off, I'd like to acknowledge that we're on Ngunnawal and Ngambri land, and I'd like to acknowledge the Aboriginal people in the room, and acknowledge that the rest of us, in one way or another, are implicit in an occupation. And speaking now, like, I want to make sure that this next bit, I'm not speaking to the black and brown people in the room, but the rest of us, the rest of you, you gotta get your shit together. Like, whether you like it or not, the society we live in, explicitly or implicitly, is underpinned by a white supremacist ideology. The White Australia policy is an explicitly white supremacist ideology, and yesterday it was endorsed in Parliament. This is, fuck the Parliament. It makes me so mad. Like my mum used to talk about when I was like a teenager and how angry I was and how I'm happy now. And, you know, I am a pretty optimistic person at heart. That's why I'm always late for meetings. But really, I'm just funneling things another way. And I wanted to talk particularly about what the senator said. He wanted to end all immigration by Muslims and non-English speaking people from the third world. So he specifically singled out Muslims, and he lied about Muslims. Like, I'm a Muslim, there are Muslims in the room. He lied when he said that working age Muslims are mostly on welfare and don't contribute. He lied when he said that African Muslim gangs are terrorising Melbourne suburbs. Like John Howard, as bad as he was, he led us into unjust wars and did all these horrible things. Tampa, there's any number of things. But even he took a principled stand against the One Nation Party and what they were espousing.
He took his time though. He took his time. He stretched it out. He allowed his party to become extreme and even kind of radicalised. That sowed the seed. And eventually he did. You cannot waste any time with this shit. It's immediate. It has to be, the comment has to be immediate.
Absolutely not. And I'm not, no way endorsing the Liberal Party ever. And
I didn't mean to speak out against the Liberal Party. I specifically want to speak out against John Howard on that issue because I reckon that was the beginning of a turning point.
Like, and I've had the Shadow Arts Minister, Labor Shadow Arts Minister, the ex-one, Mark Dreyfus, in my, I interviewed him, and we were talking about arts policy in the next election, and then when I asked him about refugee policy, I got 10 seconds of radio silence. This is the political environment that we find ourselves in. The Parliament doesn't represent me, I don't feel. And being in this room, being in this place, and feeling like, growing up I felt unwelcome in most public spaces, but this place in particular, I feel like sick to my stomach.
They haven't gone out of their way to welcome us today, have they?
I feel sick too.
We're going to provide some feedback.
So I wanted to bring up some points. Like, we're going to have a look at a few different things. We're going to look at a whole bunch of different, well, not a whole bunch, but we're going to look at a few different perspectives on accessibility. And when I'm talking about it, I guess I'm talking about equity in access to opportunity and access to conversations. And everyone in this room is here and in a way, has access. So I feel less obligation to the people that came before me and more obligation to the people and the young people that come after me. And that's how I see my role as an artist. What I'm trying to do is reach a thing. Actually, I'm taking what my mentee told me when he came to my studio. I'll show you a picture in a minute, but he comes to the studio every couple of weeks. And I asked him, like, what do you want to do? And he said, I want to reach a thing and teach a thing like what you're doing. And I thought that was a really beautiful statement. So I'm reaching a thing, teaching a thing, and then he's going to reach a thing, and he's going to teach whoever's next. But a really beautiful sentiment. And one of the things, like, for the artists in the room and also everyone else, is to consider what role you play, what role you play as an artist, and what role you play in this political discourse. I'm going to quickly go through this presentation. I won't take long, and I really want to open it up. My phone keeps dying. I've got notes on my phone, so I'm trying not to be rude. I'm not checking my Instagram. So, to give a little bit of background about me, and a couple of my privileges actually, is that I'm the youngest of three brothers, all called Abdul. The other Abdul Rahman here is in the second row. And there's a couple of peculiar things about me and my two brothers. My sister, who's the oldest and is not pictured, she runs a boxing gym, and the rest of us went to art school. So there were three Abduls, all went to the same art school over a 20-year period. Abdul Rahman, he went back as a mature age student, finished in 2012, and is living as an artist now. I'm living as an artist, and our oldest brother, who finished like in 94 or 95 or something like that, a long time ago, he went on to run art departments in West Australian Correctional Services. Now he runs education in West Australian Correctional Services. So when I go into schools, I go, if you ever get in trouble in Perth and you want to paint a picture, ask for Abdul and he'll give you a paintbrush. So that's... Now this is me and my oldest brother. I like this picture. Well, when I'm talking about access from a personal point of view, my first access that I can remember to art and the benefits of it and the value of art came when I was very, very little. When I was like this age, when my mother was a seamstress and she'd go into the city in Perth and go to Lincraft, and the city's hot, it's full of racist people who always said shit to her, but a place that she felt cool and a place that she felt safe was the Art Gallery of Western Australia. So this is a picture of the Art Gallery of Western Australia. And so every time we go to the city to go to Lincraft, she'd take me here and we'd wander around. And whether she liked it or not, one of the pieces that I remember earlier, and I don't remember this is a specific work that I'm going to show you, but it's a similar work, was coming across a wine villa. So my mum is a little brown lady wearing a scarf, and I don't know if she has conservative political values. She wouldn't necessarily want me to engage with works like this at my age, the age that I was, but this sort of opened things up to me about what art could be and what could be articulated with art. It's not necessarily just nice pictures on the wall, it's a whole other thing, and that kind of got me started. Now I live in Sydney, and I work a lot with young people outside of my practice, and it's all part of my practice. I see it as one sort of thing. So working in, going to schools, but also working in outreach, going to juvenile justice facilities, speaking to young people at risk. I think there's value in that. And looking at our main institution, or the biggest institution, Art Gallery in New South Wales, it looks like a courthouse. And it's one of those imposing places. And talking to my partner, she was working with some kids from Western Sydney there, and they talked to her about giant no-go zones, invisible no-go zones that were things that weren't for them. And I totally relate to that. Like this parliament, the whole place is not for me. And I can see it in what those kids are saying. And if your experience with the courthouse isn't like your parents going to sue someone, it's maybe something else, then this is a pretty imposing building to go to. So the first time that I can remember going to the Art Gallery in New South Wales was the Archibald in 2011, and I really felt like an interloper, but it was a lot of fun. This is when I got to meet Ben Quilty for the first time. So me and my brother came along and we had a bit of a party, but yeah. It's taken a while to feel comfortable there, and now I feel part of my role, especially when we're talking to young people in spaces like this, is to make them feel comfortable and to be able to claim ownership in that conversation and being welcoming and inclusive. So this is an example of some of the kids that I work with, and I really enjoy it. So I'll go and do workshops and go do talks, and generally it's a painting workshop or a talk, but I'm not there to teach them how to paint. Like, that's a happy aside. What I'm there to do is to essentially be a role model, or to demonstrate that their story hasn't been written for them yet. Like, I'm not trying to like glorify the position of being an artist, and I'm not training them to be artists in any way, but just saying you can kind of do what you want. You don't have to go down any particular way. You can sort of mold your own destiny, so to speak. But it's really fucking difficult when there are people in Parliament telling them to go back to where they came from. So that's, yeah, it makes life much harder. This is, this is an example of some of the kids that we work with. This is one of the outcomes at Campbelltown Arts Centre. And Campbelltown Arts Centre has a really, really fantastic outreach program. I really love what they do in Western Sydney. And this is a bit from UC Monsters documentary.
To Campbelltown Arts Centre. So the opening of Looking at Me Through You.
It's hard for me to imagine an Australia that has come to terms with the reality of its identity.
And this is Emmanuel and Levi, and I've been working with them at Eagleville High and Claymore.
Does this one smile?
The reality of its demographics and the reality of the cultures that exist here. These are the works that...
And yeah, just a little snippet. And Emmanuel, who's the first young person that's in the video, so I've been mentoring him recently, and he's been coming to the studio, and he wants to be an art teacher. So, we make paintings every couple of weeks. And Levi, there was a particularly touching story with Levi, who was second. He came in and he came to the exhibition and he saw Salotsi's artwork, who's like for Samoan heritage, and saw Samoan patterns, and that's all it took for him to go, oh, that's something that I relate to. And the next week he came back with his family and introduced them to the space, and then they've been returning to Campbelltown Arts Centre and they're seeing value in it. So that, I think, is one of the really powerful things. So this isn't really addressing the policy end, this is sort of addressing what we can do ourselves to build access to those who come next. So when I used to host a radio show, I won't go into it too much, but like one of the tricky questions that I'd ask people, which is sort of unfair but not unfair at the same time, is I'd ask them if the artist came into the space, I'd ask them who their work was for. And most people had never really considered it. And when people would say, oh, it's for everyone, there is an element of privilege in that because they've never had to see themselves as anything other than the normal. And we'll talk about what's normal very soon, I think. So my soundbite when I'm asked who I make my work for is who I'm thinking of when I'm making work, is that I'm building a legacy of cultural artifacts for that 9-year-old version of me in East Cannington or Sunshine or Frankston who can see themselves or a portion of themselves, a relatable part of our shared experience demonstrated in these institutional spaces and on that their narrative is somehow reflective without claiming any of their experience. I'm not speaking on behalf of anyone, I'm not making work about anyone, but making work for people and speaking as a member of these communities. I also go to private schools, but often I'm the first Muslim person they've ever met, and that can, that I can hopefully have a positive contribution to that conversation. Is my brother and I working the outreach program through Campbelltown Arts Centre again? And then out in Western Sydney, going to all sorts of different schools and having these conversations. One of the difficult things, like I went to Juvenile Justice Centre in Melbourne a couple of years ago now, and there was a young Muslim man there who was a repeat offender. He'd been, I wouldn't go into the details, it doesn't matter, but he's one of the guys he gets angry, and once he gets angry, there's nothing really, you can't really pull him back, and he just kept going to me, he's going, brother, you don't fucking understand, they fucking hate us, they just fucking hate us. And there was nothing that I could say at that point to get him out of that cycle. And it's not my responsibility necessarily, but it was just heartbreaking to see that someone so young, they're fucked. So not fucked, what their situation is, and it's really, really heartbreaking. But there's only so long that I could be relevant to these kids. I'm my 20s anymore. Yeah, it does look like that. I don't know how long I'll be invited to schools, and I don't know how long I can relate to these kids. But we're building a generationally, so it's still caring for each generation as it comes. One of the things that I do when I relate to them, I showed them the last painting I did when I was in high school, and it was actually just after high school, but don't tell them. And it was a self-portrait of me when I was an angry 19-year-old. So I had a long, beautiful flowing mullet. I had been banned from the shopping centre near my house and the shopping centre near my school. And I was having a good time, but it was, exactly, I wasn't yet able to articulate what was burning up inside of me. I wasn't able to articulate the siege mentality that I felt within me and my friends and my community, and how the one I was talking about before about feeling unwelcome in spaces, like that was just normal, and it's really hard to articulate if you haven't been through it. And when I was talking, that group in the juvenile justice facility, they were all 16 and 17, they were all boys, they were all kids of colour, so it was a cultural program for kids that weren't Indigenous, so they had the Aboriginal cultural program, and this was sort of a different cultural program, a pilot program. And so there was all of the kids, African kids, there was a mix, it was a big mix, anyway, but none of the kids in the group knew what the word stereotype meant, and which is also disheartening. So we sort of explained it, and everyone knew the sentiment of stereotype, but no one could sort of figure it out. And the example that they gave is that, that people, like security guards will follow me in shopping centres even if I haven't stolen anything. That's stereotyping. Also, one of the things that I've tried early is looking for mentors. Whether Richard likes it or not, I see him as a mentor. And I've learned, and not in a mentorship relationship, I'm not talking about a mentorship relationship where it's like a sit-down structured thing where someone teaches you lessons, but just as a role model, I've learned so much. So this is in 2012, I met Vernon Arquette in the year previous, and I went to go visit them in Brisbane, and met the rest of Proper now since. Yeah, fantastic. It was an amazing day, this one. Thanks, Richard. And with the work that I produce, thinking of those young people, having those people in mind, what I'm trying to do is make work that has multiple access points. And I talk about this a lot, is that whether you're coming at it from a historical point of view, philosophical, theoretical, aesthetic, political, what I'm trying to do is to give an access point to as many people as possible so that it's as relatable as possible, but I'm embedding these works with my ideas and unabashedly embedding it with my agenda. And I'm a student of history, and sorry, it's just a criticism. One of the things that said was before, like I get a little bit of a tick when white people talk about self-determination when you look at the political and historical context of that phrase. Anyway, I'm just sort of ranting. More work that's sort of embedded with a few different ideas, and working and being able to sort of expand those and have conversations outside of the Australian context. So this is my brother and I. My brother has an installation in the foreground called The Dogs, and then my work called Mission Creep in the background. This is a Pataka Art Museum, Te Eru Art Museum, sorry, in New Zealand. And also playing around with different strategies, like making these irreverent sort of images that draw people into a conversation that they might potentially, they hopefully will feel uncomfortable in. And then, a senior artist recently told me to sort of, you got to chill out on doing the television and radio stuff because you want to concentrate on your practice. And I do want to concentrate on my practice, but I see the whole thing as platform building. I see the whole thing as my practice, and then I can leverage that into speaking about things that I really want to speak about. So the example talking about advocating for the Human Rights Arts and Film Festival and being a spokesperson for that sort of thing, getting to do TEDx and to talk about these sorts of things. Imagine that, this is a funny one, there's 2,000 kids who at the Imagination something forum at Homebush, and they all were getting autographs from children's television program presenters that I'd never heard of, but it was a fascinating time. This is the radio program. David Capra and Matt Randall. This is what I've retired from radio now, but this is the group that we were with. In fact, David Capra is one of the reasons I won't go into that. That's another story. But Western Sydney is one of the reasons I moved to Sydney. Well, it is the reason after being in Melbourne and white spaces, etc. Then getting the chance to do a bit of TV stuff, and then I work for the ABC now. Maybe I'm a greedy Muslim lefty like my friend Oz Faruqi, who's been destroyed by the Daily Telegraph. And then the opportunity to work overseas and to bring these conversations, to be looking at myself as an artist in the region, but also seeing a responsibility as an Australian artist with a passport that I can walk into these countries relatively easily, and so I feel a greater obligation that when I'm there to make myself useful, and I won't go somewhere unless I can make myself useful. So I don't want to go to these spaces and I'm going to produce work there because that's what I do, but I want that opportunity to be reciprocated. And so I want to make I need to be able to give something back, otherwise it's not worth me going. Uji Handoko, who was in NGV Triennale. And this was in a village in West Java. This is with David Collins, who's my photographer. Great photographer, he travels with me. And he photographs my photographs. And this is with we were documenting the voice of Bachi Prop, who's like a teenage or girl hijabi heavy metal band that is copying all sorts of shit from where they're coming from, but they rock really hard, so we wanted to go there. Took a bunch of photos, and then I was talking about having an exhibition, some type of thing, but then ended up just giving them the photos because that was it felt like the right thing to do. I just wanted to, maybe I've talked too long. I've talked for half an hour, I believe, which is longer than I want. I just wanted to talk about, just to mention these points really quickly. What I'm trying to do, so the broad themes of what my work is I'm asking you and I'm asking my audience to afford others the specificity and complexity that you afford yourself. That's the basis of empathy. That's really what I'm trying to get at. And the other thing is that my opportunities that I've had have, like, when I was just out of art school, one of my peers said, I wish that I had a culture to exploit, to make work about. I was like, my opportunities haven't come because of my identity. They've come in spite of it. And I think that can be said for, I'm going to take it away, Esther.
complexity around the anger is just, me 20 and 30 years ago. Anyway, I want to touch on the specificity and the complexity, because I was really struck by those words when you mentioned we were having a chat about what we would talk about today. And that just seems so, like, yes, it is part of the, human condition. We accord ourselves this sense, this understanding that there are specific things about us, there are complex things about us. We don't generalise ourselves into a place, a politics, and nor do we want to, be complicit in that kind of generalising. I think that that's a really, can we start from that? And I'm also thinking about Peter's slide yesterday about, just being good.
Well, I think it's really helpful, I'm not trying to give you a Paul Buckley story, I've got plenty of privileges. I'm a man, I get all the privileges of being a man, that, we've talked about that at length. I'm an able-bodied person, I've got all the privileges of that, I can walk down these stairs, English was my first language, I can travel all through Southeast Asia and I don't have to know the language, I'm learning, try and learn, but I can just talk louder in English and someone will understand. And I wanted to also throw it to Dan Savage, who's here.
Where's Dan?
To give, right underneath the spotlight, to give
Hi, Dan.
another perspective on access.
Hey, thanks, Bill. So my name is Daniel Savage. I identify as a person with a disability. I'm a wheelchair user and I'm a practicing artist. I just wanted to ask a few questions related to this topic to everyone in the room and to Nava, to think about the space of disabled people as arts practitioners, as art workers, and as arts audiences. I think it's fairly poignant to note that until Abdul just mentioned it there in my introduction, disability hasn't been mentioned once in this conversation. Thanks. It's very controlled where people with disabilities have in this conversation itself, the fact that I'm up the back, the fact that I couldn't volunteer to come down for the group audiences and those other kind of spaces. I want to ask a question that people with disabilities, from a point, is generally discriminated against in a passive way. It's not often done in an active way, that we're just not thought of. For example, the fact that it hasn't been mentioned in this conversation. And I think everyone should question why that is, why that themselves as artists or arts workers or arts organisations, that's not involved in the conversation. That possibly the change needs to come from a whole cultural change rather than where it's currently looked at the moment as an additional response. At the end, can we then include people with disabilities? It's often kind of where we're looked at in that space. And decide, okay, well, if there is a cultural change, where does that fit into the what we're doing at the moment with the code of practice? Okay, so how does that include in our code of practice where we can think about accessibility? Where does that come under us as individuals? What's the role we play in that conversation? Us as galleries, what's the role we play in the conversation? What do state and federal bodies play in that conversation? What does the National Gallery play in that conversation? Other cultural institutions for their role? Because often, again, it is passed the buck a little bit about, well, if they aren't doing anything, why should we do anything? Is that our responsibility? Is that artist's responsibility? And it's just kind of the conversation has moved on again and again and again. So I think there has been a little bit of an exclusion of people with disabilities. Again, not in an active way, in a passive way, and then apologized for afterwards, which is often what we get. So people kind of, and then there's a patting on the back when there is any inclusion of people with disabilities. That, yay, didn't we do a good job? Now back to the real business of making art. And I just wanted to bring that up as a question for everyone. I know there's no way we can kind of come to a conclusion now about what to fix that, because the other point is as well that the disability rights movement has no decision about us without us is kind of our catchphrase, and the fact that there will be some people in this room with disabilities that haven't necessarily spoken about that. There's not a lot of people in this room that can directly speak to that as well. So having them not in the conversation in the first place makes it difficult to even speak about it. Yeah, that's pretty much what I just wanted to put forward so that people can actually think about it.
I love that. And can you say that again? not about us, without us?
Not about us, without us. And I think that comes across a lot of sectors within the community that aren't included in conversations in the first place, whether it's multicultural, whether that's Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander, whether that's LGBTI. Often it's conversations are held without us in a very paternalistic way, that here we'll look after you and we'll do the right thing for you without ever actually asking us if that's what we wanted in the first place.
Thank you so much for saying all that, Dan. It's our discussion is going to touch on disability, on gender. We're going to talk a bit about that later on NAGA's next plans following our early stuff earlier this year. And also what you said just in the end there about stuff we all need to do, but also about the conversation that we're all a part of, and then identifying or not, and how, you know, and the choices that we make. So many people know I'm a person with disability from a migrant background. English is not my first language, and being in this seat gives me all sorts of privilege, given the voice that I have. And it's something that in my previous organisations I have made an enormous priority in terms of shifting that culture through the formal things like disability action planning, which is now something that, you know, has entered the sort of, you know, the institutional vocabulary, but also around those cultural things about our practices and the decisions that we make, and the voices that we open up. And you're also completely right to point out that a venue like this gives you all of what, 2 options of where you can sit.
There was one.
One option. Oh, well, bingo.
Sorry, yeah, I was supposed to be up the front.
They changed.
And
Yeah,
then
but
we
yeah,
got
we had the
here.
option of, yeah.
Security decided that it was undue hardship on them to get me to the front. So the option is, can I get to the bathroom and go have lunch with everyone else?
Yeah.
Or do I sit at the front for the whole meeting?
And Penelope's just pointing out that only happened 2 days ago, so we're given a whole bunch of information about, just recently, we're given a whole bunch of information about how we're going to make both of the spaces as welcoming and accessible as possible. And so, yes, we'll be providing some more feedback. I don't want to detract from the rightly dismissive way that you put the apologising later, but I am going to apologise because it's, the conversation and the whole activity should be open to everyone. To have just one place in the whole place that you can sit, that's just not the way that this place should be welcoming. Are there other experiences? I think it would be really, really important for us to open up and have that conversation. Are there experiences that the non-male identifying people of the cultures that actually have a culture, to borrow Abdul's phrase? Who was the person who said we haven't got a culture to? That's a bizarre thing to say.
I'm not going to name names.
No. I thought I'd catch him there. I didn't think he'd said.
Even sorry, I'm interrupting.
No, you're right.
But like now, do art stuff a lot. Obviously, I get curated into things, but I've had like people who are considered amazing curators, like who are curating into a show, go, oh, this time you're not going to be a token, and like, when the fuck was I a token? I mean, when was I a token? Anyway.
Well, I was once asked to be on the cover of the Disability Action Plan because I was the easiest disabled person to deal with. I refused, obviously. Now, who would like to add to the conversation and share an experience? We can talk about the commitments that we're going to make. There is a hand up the back. Sorry, there's these lights. There are these 2 lights. I'm going to leave it to Claudia to identify because I'm sorry, I can't see.
So I just wanted to make the point that we have come to Parliament, and this is an arts conference, so Parliament should be coming to us for a 10-minute talk, which we could do by Skype or something anyway. We should be in our natural environment, whatever that is. It's not Parliament. And I'm a non-voter, and I understand why other people feel the urge to vote or the necessity. But Australia already has a law and a governance system, so I consider myself a non-citizen because I won't vote. And a lot of other people only vote because they don't want to get a fine. And there are ways around that. So you can just fill out the paperwork all the time. When they send you the fine, you just say, I'm not voting for cultural reasons. And we're all sitting here in this room like, you know, the crippled child or the red-headed child of the family. Parliament's not in here with us. So our cultural reason is because we are rejected from Australian society. We're not supported, we don't have a policy, therefore we don't have to vote.
We've got a comment just down here while we get the microphone to you. It's just Taz here with her hand up. Oh, have we got a second one up the... Okay, Holly, we're going to give the mic to Taz, and I can totally understand that, you know, when things to points when there is no policy, you know, we just want to withdraw and disengage, and we totally have the right to do that, whether there's a fine or not. You absolutely have the right.
But it's not disengaging. If you change the system, all you're doing is creating a new thing. It's still engaging, it's still active, it's just in a different way.
Yeah, yeah. And as I was saying in the... Oh yeah, one thing I really worry about in terms of political disengagement is that, well, quite rightly, when we distrust politicians, we don't want to engage, and then we withdraw, and then we're not actively talking to them and expressing our point of view. And then when we disengage, we actually give those people in some ways more power, because they are in more control, because they're not hearing from us about what we expect. So I think it's it's up to some of us to feel the, step back, and it's up to others of us to step forward.
When you engage, you're encouraging them.
Yeah, so how can we master the game?
You change the system, that's the way.
Taz.
Well, the way I feel about that is, how can we possibly change the system by doing nothing? And there are countries in the world now where people are being killed and having violence committed against them.
Like Palm Island.
Purely for wanting to vote in a democratic system that's not rigged. And here we are in Australia with the right to vote, and as our present Lord Mayor candidate here would say, there were all kinds of issues with the Melbourne Lord Mayor vote, with candidates having enough money to send pamphlets overseas to people that have the rights to vote overseas for the Melbourne Lord Mayor election, which directly affects the cultural policies of Melbourne. So I really, personally, I think that it's a huge responsibility for artists to really take a stand and participate in voting if we want anything to happen at all. And as Esther says, if we don't, then we're just absolutely handing power over. And once you've lost it, you can't get it back. I think to get that back would be a 1,000 times bigger job than any position that we're in now.
Thank you to the team up the back who turned those yellow lights off, and now I can see everyone, and Abdul can see you all too. That has made a massive difference. Now, who
doesn't mean I'll look.
I want to hear some more about some experiences of inclusion or exclusion, to the extent that we're comfortable to share them, and then I want to talk about some commitments that we would like to make. So, some non-male identifying artists. There is a person just there.
How do I put this? I mean, it didn't escape me that one of the, the only parliamentarian that I recognized here today was Pauline Hanson, and she wasn't talking to us.
And Ali walked past as well, and I really recommend you look at the speech that she gave today.
But I guess, coming back to these, I'm interested in, how do you avoid being tokenized? And what are practical ways to address that especially because, you know, the arts sector is one of the most homogenous sectors in the most unregulated, culturally, sectors of, and we'd like to think that we're all a bunch of, you know, lefties, but that's not true. It's very competitive, and it's very cutthroat, and it's very, you know, it shouldn't be like that, but, you know, it's embedded in society. So considering that it's quite a concentrated, it's a small group of people, and it is very homogeneous. So how does one avoid that? What is a practical way, a practical approach, to avoid being tokenized? What's some sort of infrastructure or some sort of policy that can be added? Also, how is this regulated? How can we regulate this? Because I feel like I've had conversations like this a lot in my career as an artist, and it'd be nice to have something actioned.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't think the onus is on us to stop being tokenised. And we've got that's the onus on the people doing tokenising.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah, and there are some amazing examples, and there's some institutions in the room as well, where leadership is handed over, curation is handed over. I'm particularly impressed with what I'm seeing down at ACCA and also at Footscray Community Arts Centre with leadership programs, with curatorial programs that bring people into decision making. So how do we hand over decision making? How do we open up decision making?
Well, look at the history of ACCA. Prior to this directorship, how many Aboriginal people curated into the Australian Centre of Contemporary Asian Art? Which is like 1, 2, none?
I think there were 3, but they weren't included by the actual director of ACCA. It was included by curators within ACCA.
Yeah. Katie.
Oh, well, I was just actually going to reiterate what Abdul said. Like, I think I come from a migrant family, but I also sort of recognise that I am white, or I pass as being white, and I think that, you know, as a white person, it's my responsibility to be trying to make a difference, and actually acknowledging my own privilege within that. And I think the onus is on us actually to be the people that are looking in our institutions and saying, what are we doing to change this? Like, we can't just be constantly expecting people from sort of other cultures or sort of other cultural backgrounds to be like putting the pressure on us. And I think that was definitely something that I put forward through the campaign that I ran, is how do we even look at the buildings that we enter? You know, how do we change those spaces? How do we take institutional settings outside of those buildings and bring them to spaces that, you know, or cultures that maybe don't want to enter into those spaces? Like, how do we re-understand on a daily basis how an organisation might work, so you can include someone that maybe has children that, you know, can't afford childcare, that needs to, you know, that can't engage on that really intense level but still wants to engage. And I think it's actually the onus is on us rather than the other way around.
There's a hand back, looks like Goya from here. And thank you for that. I mean, it's absolutely true. I mean, we all have to make our own expectations really clear of, particularly the institutions that we want to keep engaging with, that we want to change. Has Zoe got the mic?
Yeah. Sorry. I just wanted, Beth can speak to this better than me, but I wanted to give an example of a project that was incredibly successful in Alice Springs that Beth spearheaded. It was called Abmurran Penjikan, which means a place for language in Central Aranda. And it was an incredible project that brought together the Aranda community and has actually shifted in quite an impressive way the sort of cultural or the community sensitivity and respect for Aranda people in Alice Springs and Bantwa. And I guess I wanted to make the point that art is a really amazing way particularly working with social practice, and social practice is an amazing way to create safe spaces. And I think if you want an example of a great way to encourage access and a safe space, and if you ever want to learn about the importance of listening, please speak to Beth sometimes and research this project. And there's lots and lots of projects around Australia that are doing these really, really respectful and sensitive and engaging projects.
Thanks, Zoya, and there absolutely are, and in particular, the ways in which social engaged practice is increasingly interfacing with institutional practice at smaller scales, I think is incredibly important. I can't wait to see that at more of a larger scale. Before we go to the next question, just because of the time, I wanted to just briefly touch on Nava's next steps around the gender questions that we all started to, we've all been having ever since, you know, a range of very public issues and events in the arts, in the performing arts, and so on. Around International Women's Day this year, we put out that statement that I think you may all have seen, called Dear Person, I've been reluctant to keep engaging with, but have had to for professional reasons. And that was about actually directing something to perpetrators of gendered harassment, as opposed to, you know, the endless stream of advice to people who are being harassed or violent incidents or worse. Ever since then, we've been talking to a bunch of organisations as well as some lawyers about putting together a whistleblower protocol, like a way of being able to make complaints and raise issues, but also maintain anonymity. There have been a number of organisations, there might be some represented in this room, who have had to go through that difficult process of either receiving an anonymous complaint and not actually being able to deal with it, and not being able to, you know, identify and keep that person safe through a process, or sometimes even be able to engage, to go through a process because of that anonymity. There are ways in other industries that whistleblowers can maintain anonymity and a process can still be gone through for whatever kind of issue, be it gendered harassment or otherwise. So some pro bono lawyers have put together a protocol for us. We've now shared that with a few different organisations, and the idea is to refine and develop something that can become a sector standard and that can sit alongside work that's being done in other art forms, including some of you may have seen the sector code of conduct that Live Performance Australia, South Australian Film Commission, a few others put together over the last many months. That was released last week. So the idea is to do something all together that can be really useful. I just wanted to update us on that while we're talking about all of this. A lot of hands went up. No one's actually got the mic at the moment. We will give it to Miranda. Oh, sorry, we have got a mic, have we? Oh, Zoya's got it. Someone else has it. Miranda is going to raise her hand. Miranda is from the Countess, the Countess report, which I recommend you look up if you She's got stereo now. This is good.
What I wanted to mention is around the Countess report, but also around education, which I think Abdul spoke really nicely about in terms of his own experience within education. But also when we're talking about like whistleblowing, for example, that's quite a late step in actually changing a culture that does not automatically condone gendered harassment in the arts, and also harassment based on many other grounds as well. And education, I think, links back to what Abdul's talking about, but also as some ways that need to go alongside policies around whistleblowing too, I believe. So like political pedagogy, really critical pedagogy, pedagogy that doesn't necessarily just sanction the curriculum, stuff that's being taught, I think is really, really important and can be a great resource for educators and for anyone working in the arts to think about how we can share knowledge that will hopefully try and instill these values amongst younger people.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Sana, for giving me the chance to, I wasn't very clear about where the protocol sits in. So yeah, whistleblower is way late, but the idea is to plug into the other national work that's being done, so the code of practice for organisations and a code of conduct for people, and this is part of a national thing. So yeah, if we're relying just on that, that would be, yeah, as you say, that would just be absurd.
Yeah, next time you're at an exhibition opening, have a look around, see how many black and brown faces are, and ask yourself why.
I was just thinking about that question or your topic of how to address inequality, and everyone seems to have very similar concerns in their own areas, but and I've been speaking with the RE crew, which is my background, but I'm also kind of working on the other side in local government as well, and I was thinking about your statement up the back, Darren, about not about us, without us, and I think maybe in assessment panels, in where whatever your organisations are, local government or your arts orgs, I think it's really important to maybe to have representation there. So even as artists, when you're going through applying for applications, maybe you could also contact those people and say, hey, do you have an arts person on your assessment panel? Do you have someone with background in disability? And if not, just recommend people, because I think without delving anyone in, I have been quite surprised at the lack of diversity on different panels, and not because of deliberate mismanagement, but perhaps just convenience. So just get active. If you can do it, get in touch with those organisations and put your hand up for it.
Abdul, we're about to run out of time. What are some, a lot of this comes down to understanding privilege, understanding the decisions that we're a part of, but also in all the different ways that we have, in all the different means that we have to be advocates, to be making our expectations clear. What's one of the most important things, I guess, that Nava needs to hear right now?
I think it's really, well, I don't know if it's one of the most important things, but it's just what I've been thinking right now. As artists, and maybe I'm talking specifically to the artists in the room, we are sole traders in the most volatile industry on the planet. Yeah. It's difficult, and I know it's difficult. And people have talked about my trajectory, but like Buzz Lightyear says in Toy Story, I'm just falling with style. And I think that can be said. There's no defined pathway. You know what I mean? It's a wobbly path, and we're all going to mess up. But try moving forward. Maybe, I don't know.
Yes, it's a wobbly path. I guess, yeah. Ask people who don't look and sound like you when you're in a position where you can make this, where you're in a position of leadership, and you can open and share that when you're somewhere where you can see that others are not represented there. I mean, these are just personal commitments that we need to make to a future that we all build together. And I like this idea of a wobbly future, because it's just, like we said yesterday, in different contexts, there aren't single trajectories to a place that looks the same. There is the way that you've put it, the specificity and the complexity. Thank you for sharing what you do.
I'm not supposed to respond.
Tell us about your specificity and your complexity. No, it's just that's really resonating with me, because it's just it's incredibly important and ethic. Like, how do we drive that through the way that we make decisions and just live in the world.
It's to sort of bring it back to my original point, I guess, with the senator that spoke yesterday, and he's talking about, maybe I'm going off topic, but he's talking